A good Erev Shabbos, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well, and amidst the difficult nature that the days are bringing and the news is bringing. But God willing, just as quickly as all this is escalating, hopefully it will pass even faster and even more speedily. I wanted to just share a few words as we go into this very unique and unfortunate Shabbos where we won't be able to be together to uplift each other. You know, the quarantine that some people are experiencing this Shabbos, and the fact that we are separated this Shabbos, it's actually very interesting and very something to be noted, that it happens to be that it falls out on Parshas Parah, because we find that in order to prepare the Parah Aduma, there was a group of people that actually needed to go through a separation. They needed to go through what seems like some sort of a quarantine. The Mishnah describes how, in order to get the water that they would mix with the ashes of the red heifer, of the red cow, of the Parah Aduma. So how are you supposed to be able to get that water? The water needed to have been drawn in a pure way, which means that it poses a catch-22, because if the water is going to be drawn by anyone who is impure, so then that's going to make the water impure. And therefore, you need to make sure that you have people that are pure. But how are you supposed to ensure that people are 100% pure? So what they did is that there were these very special women. There were these Nashim Tzidkanios that would go and live in a quarantine. They would live separated from society, and they would raise their family and have children in this secluded area that was constructed in such a way that it wouldn't contract any sort of tuma, any sort of impurity. And that is the way that they would live. And then they would have the babies, they would raise the children, they would set up schools for them, and raise these children up. And then eventually, these children, when they were about the age of 7, 8, 9 years old, they would go out and they would put them on these like huge oxen, these huge animals with wide spaces underneath them, in order so that the animals would not allow any tuma, any impurity to get to these children. They would send the children out riding on these animals with a bucket in hand. That was a very unique type of a bucket that, again, would not contract any sort of impurity. They would go out to draw the mechatas, to draw the pure be'er from the pure mayim chayim, and they would use that water and mix that with the ashes. And that was the way that they ensured that they would have this perfect pure water. That's what the Mishnah says. However, Tosfos points out that there's a major issue with this process. The major issue with this process is that at the end of the day, what was going to happen with this water? It was going to have to be mixed with the ashes. Now, who was going to mix the water and the ashes? So Tosfos says the following. He says, "V'kitzas tema." And there's a big question over here that we have to be wondering. Ma mo'il milui zeh. What was the whole purpose of setting up this society of quarantine, of separation, that people had to live separated from their regular communities, their regular Torah communities, in order so that they could raise their children to go get the water? At the end of the day, what's going to happen? They would draw the water, the children would draw the water. However, so at the end of the day, who's going to mix the ashes and the water together? You're going to need an adult male in order to mix the ashes and the water together. It's going to make the water impure. So at the end of the day, Tosfos asks, what was the whole point of it? What was the whole point of the quarantine? What was the whole point of the separation? If at the end of the day, the goal that they were achieving was this perfect water and ash mixture, this perfect mechatas that they would be able to use to purify people, using the Parah Aduma properly, if at the end of the day, the water would become impure, so what did it help setting up this whole society? You should have just sent someone who was impure in the first place. If either way the water is going to become impure eventually, so then what was the purpose of setting up this whole society? And Tosfos gives a very profound answer, a very meaningful answer, and an answer that we have to think about as we enter into this type of a Shabbos. Tosfos says that while on the way to achieve perfection. That if our goals are perfection, our goals are purity, along the way, even though we may not achieve perfection, we could still achieve greatness. Toso says the following. He says, that at the end of the day, they kept the water pure as long as possible. And it was worth it to set up this whole quarantine and this whole separation just so that we can keep the water pure as long as possible. I think that there is something to add over here and something to be said about the fact that there is this whole separation that takes place and that the purity doesn't even happen after the separation. I think it's something that needs to be pointed out, is that when do we actually use the water? And when do we actually mix it with the ashes of the paraduma? And when do we actually use the ashes from the paraduma? When do we actually use the meichadas, this mixture, in order to purify other people for the actual end goal, for the result we're looking for, to pure people in order so that they can continue their service of God? It's once we give the water to the Kohen. It's once we give the water to someone else. It's once we bring people back into the picture. We may have thought that, you know what, separation, isolation may be a good way for us to attain purity and attain perfection. And if I go out into isolation, maybe then I'll be able to attain purity. But I think that the Torah is trying to send us a very clear message over here. That while separation may get you to a certain point, it may even bring you to greatness. At the end of the day, true purification is only going to come once you rejoin back together. We are right now experiencing a separation. But in order to achieve true purity, there needs to be togetherness. You know, in Parshas Kisisa, this week's Parsha, the Torah tells us the following, that every single member of Klal Yisrael had to bring a half shekel coin to the Beis Hamikdash in order so that they could collect the monies necessary for the communal offerings. And the Torah tells us the following. It says, Ha'ashir lo yarbeh, v'hadal lo yamit. That those that were affluent, rich, were not able to give more than half a shekel. They couldn't give, let's say, 20 shekel or 30 shekel. I can afford it, therefore I'll give a little more. No, you had to give half a shekel. You weren't allowed to give more. And in fact, some Rishonim say that this is a prohibition in the Torah to give more than half a shekel. Even if you could afford it, to give 3/4 of a shekel, just 50% more, would be a violation of the Torah, as if you're eating chaza. Why? Your Baruch HaLevavitz explains, because we all share an equal part and responsibility in raising up Klal Yisrael. That it's not me alone, I can't do it. When we are separated, when we feel as though I'm going to have to do this alone, you're not going to accomplish your goals. You might accomplish something, but at the end of the day, true purity is going to come through togetherness. Once that water is drawn and brought back to the Beis Hamikdash, and they have to get someone else involved in order to mix the ashes, in order to use it, and then it became impure, but then in order to use it for its purification process, you needed to do that. You needed to come back together, because togetherness is when we can achieve true purity. You know, it's a major issue that right now Klal Yisrael is facing, that we're living in this sort of an isolation, that the hardest thing that any rabbi has to do is close a shul, close a place where Jews come together physically to achieve this purification, where we come together every single Shabbos together to achieve this goal, and then to close the doors. We need to make sure that we are focusing our efforts during this type of a unique Shabbos. First of all, just to take stock in how grateful we should be to the fact that we do have a place in our community that we can come together. And we can truly appreciate that now that that we don't have it this Shabbos. But I think that we also need to be focusing on and contemplating on and doing introspection over the course of this Shabbos as to how can I make my efforts even greater of davening for Klal Yisrael on behalf of others. How can I make sure that I'm not just learning alone, but moving forward, I'm going to learn as a group. I'm going to uplift people along with me. How can I make sure that I can be there for others during these times? We need to focus ourselves to make sure that we as a people are there for one another. And even though we're experiencing a separation, but just like those holy women and those holy children that were in separation from society in order to get the water, our job this Shabbos is to get the water. But then, God willing, soon we'll rejoin back together in order so that we can use our experiences over this time in order to achieve true tahara, true purity. I give everyone a bracha that this very unique and unfortunate Shabbos that we're not together, that actually becomes an opportunity to do some reflection and introspection as to how can I refocus myself towards these goals? How can I refocus myself towards Achdus? And when we daven our Shabbos davening, that we are doing introspection during our davening and thinking, how can I work on my v'ahavta l'recha kamocha? How can I start thinking of others more? How can I start helping my community more? How can I start volunteering more? How can I start learning more in my community, in my shul, davening at more services? How can I make sure that I strengthen the achdus among us? Because even though we're separated, doesn't mean that we can't build our togetherness. I wish everyone a meaningful Shabbos. I wish everyone a Shabbos that we can accomplish this goal, and God willing soon, that this will be the first and last Shabbos that we have to close our doors to our shul, because God willing, Hashem will turn this whole issue around, and that God willing will be able to have the true togetherness, the kibbutz golius, the kibbutz kol amcha Yisrael, that will be able to bring all of Klal Yisrael together, b'mher b'yameinu, when Mashiach comes. Amen. I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos.